It is Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. David Locke with you, radio voice of the Utah Jazz. Thanks very much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen every single day. For your second listen, grab Locked On Now, a daily podcast running through all of the actions of last night's games, including the NFL, NHL, NBA, all separated on for you in the podcast on Locked On Now, or go to Locked On NBA on YouTube. Jazz suffer a massive injury. Joe Ingles' left knee buckles, explodes, gives out, whatever phrase you want to use. We have not heard an official word as of recording this, but all indications are it could be season ending for Joe, and time will tell whether or not it's his final game with the Utah Jazz or a career ending for the Utah Jazz. So let's look at that for Joe. I mean, the first question for the franchise moving forward is he's a free agent at the end of the year. And so if he's still on the roster at the end of the year, Joe then has to make a decision of what he wants to do. Does he want to rehab, try to come back, play again, not have this be his final moment? Or is the bronze medal for Australia, the three kids, the wife, 34 years old, feeling as though it's just, this is the right time. You just don't go much later than this. This was the end of it. I'll rehab and get it done, but I'm going to go on and have a regular life and get back to beautiful Melbourne, Australia, and do what I do. That time will tell. So for the Jazz, now moving forward as a franchise, we talked a little bit earlier on the floor, and as I said, I think it's Rudy Gay with an Eric Paschall combination, maybe some Daniel House in there. I do think the unfortunate was I think Eric Paschall had begun to show signs of maybe being able to play a lineup with a five. And so if you suddenly have Paschall and Gay playing together in those minutes with Hassan Whiteside, that doesn't feel great to me right now. The Jazz have not done that very much together. You probably can do it with just Rudy Gobert, but I don't think they've played Eric Paschall and Rudy Gay together this year with a center. This will be, if they do that, it will be the first time all season long that the Jazz have done that with Rudy Gay and Eric Paschall together with a center. From a purely just, if you're listening on YouTube and grabbing this segment, there's two other segments that are kind of about Joe, his player, and what he brings. From a purely pragmatic standpoint now, from a franchise standpoint, I don't know that this hurts his trade value actually a great deal. I know that sounds crazy, but if you look at the NBA trade machine, and we are obviously not going to run through our first Western Conference teams today, and you look at the Jazz, in many ways, depending on the trade you were making with Joe Ingles, you were really just trading Joe Ingles' $13 million contract that expires the end of the season. It's unlikely you were trading Joe Ingles to a team that saw Joe as a major piece to the puzzle moving forward at 34 years old. And so, even if you were doing some wild, crazy trade like a Tobias Harris or a Gordon Hayward, who was another max player we talked about, like we had these like three max players anyway. And so Joe was in it. Joe was in it because of a $13 million contract. I actually think that's still just as likely. I don't think that this, as crazy as that sounds, I don't think this actually hurts Joe's trade value. The Jazz ability to trade Joe. Joe's trade was going to be a $13 million contract that was moving to a team, in many ways maybe going to be bought out so he could go play for someone else down the stretch. He was going to be a free agent at the end of the season where he got to pick where he was going to play. Or maybe even, depending, as I said earlier, I think it probably cost Joe, $10 to $15 million. The injury last night, if in fact it's season ending, hopefully he gets some of it back if he wants to keep playing. But from a purely trade standpoint, I would say that it shouldn't have a large impact on the Jazz. If they have a trade they want to make and he's a $13 million slot, they probably had to put a draft pick. If it's for a really good player, they were going to probably have to put a draft pick into it prior, and they're probably still going to have to put a draft pick into it. The interesting one for the Jazz, by the way, I don't, Joe had shot 30% from the field and 20% from three for the month of January. I don't think he had fallen off the cliff. I just think he was off. And if you look at his career, January has always been a tough one. But if for some reason he had fallen off the cliff, this at least gets them moving forward. I don't know. I don't have a lot of feeling on that one, but there is probably something there. The biggest concern for me for the Jazz kind of going forward is the locker room. So, and it's been interesting to hear that Mike Conley's taking a larger role, has been a little quiet. This has not been a team where Mike, as the veteran's been very loud. Joe's been one of the louder guys in that locker room. George Niang was the most positive energy in that locker room, and Favors was the quiet leader in that locker room. Like all of them, passage of time, are suddenly not prevalent playing every day. And so I do think that's a really big issue for the Jazz, is kind of where their soul is as a franchise right now. And, Joe and Jordan had this incredible connection. Joe was kind of the one who could maybe poke at you a little bit on the truth of what was going on. Like, hey, it's nice to drop 30. How was that defense last night? Oh, you're gonna go there. Yeah, I am gonna go there. Kind of like, I think that was a little bit in his makeup at times, that he could probably get on someone, like, hey, those were three great, like, what about, like, whatever it might be. Um, so I think that there was some truth serum to what he kind of had in the locker room, and then also just his personality was positive in so many ways that you wanted to be around it. That's a real loss, for this group in that sense. And so I don't want to minimize that. And there's not any way to have it, but from a pure pragmatic trade standpoint, I actually don't think it's a big hurt. February 10th is coming, and if Joe was the primary trade piece for the Jazz, which I'm certain he was aware of, then I still think he is, and I don't actually think that the fact that he can't play hurts a great deal. In fact, it might make it easier for everybody. Like, if we trade Joe Ingles tomorrow, the outrage from the Jazz fans is going to be less than it would have been before he got hurt. If he had been traded, 4 days from now when he's still playing, the outrage would have been, I think, significant. That here's our guy and we traded him. At this point, you're literally just moving a contract the way you did with Matt Harpering at the end of his career, and then Joe can rehab and sign wherever he wants as a free agent. The last one I wanted to just point out today, I just thought was almost cruel, is that Quinn and Joe have been really, really tied together. Quinn brought Joe, created kind of a role for him in an offense. It was a little different for him, put the ball in his hands, trusted him, let him make plays, did a lot of things. They probably definitely had their rubs at times where Quinn wanted Joe to run and Joe wanted to come back for the ball and this and that. But the fact of the matter was that those two were incredibly intertwined and been together. And here's Quinn Snyder, for only the second time in his NBA career, missing a game. And then worse than missing a game, has COVID and is not able to be in the locker room to be with Joe last night. Or even worse than that, he actually, having, I believe, gotten back to Salt Lake City, is now unable to go see Joe. So really just kind of the cruelty of all of what we're living through right now with COVID and everything else really comes to strike on this story internally for us, if we all know how it works, in the sense that Quinn and Joe so intertwined their careers, so met together for the Jazz. And I think, suddenly Quinn unable to go spend the time with Joe that he would want to, and want to support him in so many different ways. So that's kind of where we sit. Just to recap it all. We'll hear today on the news. Hopefully this show was unnecessary, but it doesn't seem like it. Here's a guy who comes to us in 2014-15, evolves from, a guy that doesn't look like an NBA player at all, that's the substitute math teacher, to a key cog of why the Jazz were so good during all these years, with the most memorable moments from Paul George to the Memphis Headman. You see the truth of who he is as a human, as he supports his son through his wife and his family through autism, and they support him as well. The autism night in the Vivint Arena. It's one of the great, moments of all time. We see Joe openly share with us what he gets, the accomplishment of that bronze medal and bringing that to his home country. And then the locker room of this team has been special, and that's been a signature of Joe Ingles. We've seen him evolve as a player and become better in the way that I think all of us want to get better in our lives and improve ourselves at what we do. He's been our special piece. Like, we knew how good Joe was, and the rest of the league might not have known, and couldn't quite figure out, like, why are we losing to the Jazz? I mean, I know they got Donovan and Rudy, but what? Well, because we got Joe. And it was Joe was doing all those things. And now the Jazz have to find a way to replace his 25 minutes a night, the 25 minutes that most recently in the month of January weren't very good, but have been for so long. And frankly, right now we're short 240 minutes as an NBA team. We've got to find new lineups. We've got to rebuild rotations. It's a key cog for the Jazz to be able to replace it. The player I think it falls most square on their shoulders is Rudy Gay. He's got a 3-year contract. He's got to step up, a larger role, be ready to go, get his body into the best condition he can for 35 years old, and see what he can do. And finally, from a trade standpoint, from a locker room standpoint, I think it's a gaping hole for the Utah Jazz and what they're doing moving forward. But from a trade standpoint, I don't know that it is actually that big a detriment. I think that Joe's contract was actually what was being moved more than Joe's skills if the Jazz were to make a move at this point and try to get better. And that still seems to be feasible and maybe even in some ways easier than it was before. All right, that is Locked on Jazz today. Tough day for Jazz fans. The happy hat will come back tomorrow. It will be February. We can turn a page from the 4-12 January month and hopefully move toward better days with Donovan and Rudy getting healthy, rebuild this team, find out what they can do through this adversity. It's an interesting twist, and it's an unfortunate twist on what has already been a tough season for the Utah Jazz. This has been Locked on Jazz. Right now, make your second listen Locked on Now on podcast or Locked on Now at Locked on NBA on YouTube. Have a great one.